I often introduce you as the only person that ever had me considering joining a GPO.
I'll take that distinction. I'll definitely take that distinction.
So long-standing background in purchase services, which kind of trickles into vendor credentialing as a service that people sign up for. But would love to hear, even before the MedPricer to Premier story, just some background for our listeners.
Yeah. So it's a little crazy. I actually started my career in medical device as a rep at Zimmer. I went to school for finance and accounting, thought I was going to go work for PwC doing public audit. And I had interned at a sales territory in the Bay Area for Zimmer, and just happened to get lucky. That guy wanted to take over the distributorship. And so he's like, hey, I want you to come run inventory and like operations. And he offered me a whole bunch more money than PwC, and the rep lifestyle seemed pretty appealing at the time. So I ended up signing up for that gig and shut the accounting thing down and went to work for Zimmer out of college. And what was interesting was the first thing I wanted to do was like no different than they still have today, like inventory challenges in the field with consigned inventory, trunk stock, all that kind of good stuff. So I looked for solutions, and randomly there was a company a mile away called Mobitor that was in the business of doing, right as iPads were coming out, doing mobile inventory management. And so handshake deal to do a pilot so they could try and get into the rest of Zimmer. And I basically implemented the thing myself for them. And in the kind of crazy world of how things go, that boss that I had at 42 ended up having a heart attack and passing away. Just like young kids, like sad story. Great mentor for me, great person. A lot of people relied on him, so it was sad, but it was one of those things that kind of shapes you and the rest of your career when you're that young. I had just bought a condo. It was like, there was a lot going on. And ultimately I ended up going to work for Mobitor. And so they had signed up Johnson and Stryker and said, hey, why don't you come work for us instead? And that started my journey into software. So from there, we were out raising money. I started in customer success before it was called customer success, helping to manage Johnson and Stryker, got into the product side and just helped grow the company over time. We ended up with Integra Life Sciences was a customer, L2M for a time before, well, they were still around. It was a lot of fun, a good ride, and ended up becoming the chief operating officer there. We started up a retail sector in addition to the healthcare one that kind of used similar technology for, think about like retail merchandising. Similar problem. It's like people, third parties in the field doing the merchandising. Ended up taking Apple into 36 different countries as a customer there. And through meeting investors while on that journey, that was what led me to MedPricer, and got introduced to Chris Gormley through an investor, and then ended up on the MedPricer journey, which led to the acquisition of Premier, and had always been looking and waiting maybe to take a chance to be CEO and run a company, and got presented with this opportunity at Green Security. And it was so good that I was willing to move the family 2,800 miles to Florida to join. And it's been awesome ever since. I'm extremely excited about the way things are going.
Love that. You, just by way of your background on the paths you didn't take, focusing on finance early probably set you up with a different background than a lot of the sales folks. So when you're transitioning into more operational or strategic roles, you have more of a framework than potentially a lot of other people were coming to like leadership meetings with, right? You're thinking about maybe more things strategically from the company P&L perspective versus just net new revenue.
For sure. Yeah, no, my dad early on said, hey, go get an accounting degree and you can do whatever you want in business. You'll be able to understand financial statements, all that. That's what his dad told him. And he ended up in operations too. Yeah, for the most part, we're a family of people with accounting degrees, save for my littlest sister. Everyone else has got an accounting degree. It definitely helps. Yeah.
That's awesome. You've also lived the continuum of all the different company types in healthcare, other than being in a provider, but working closely with them. So the startup space, the med device company, the GPO life, and now leading an organization that is really hot and heavy in the market, right? With recent fundraising and so on. What have you, from those different experiences, what are you taking to Green Security from what you loved at some of those companies, like your mentor and grooming you for success, to some of the good policies that a GPO might have being matrixed and so on?
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. I think the thing that's obvious when you're at a big company, you sacrifice is like the agility and speed. There's obviously ramped up risk management, legal, HR, all those kinds of things. But I think it also makes you just take a step back and think about your decisions a little more. When I was at a 35-person company being acquired by a public one, when we first got in, the transition was rough just because we were so used to speed. Having a little bit of balance in thinking a little bit more, especially in high risk areas, I think just is something always now sticking in the back of your mind versus earlier in my career, it was like, just break through walls and let's not necessarily worry about that. I think the relationship piece too, and just the being able to navigate a matrixed organization, like just not that you need the politics in a small organization, but it definitely helps like to have you foster collaboration across the team because you've gotten good at building consensus in a big group to get things to move forward. Now it's like, you're not necessarily building consensus to need to move forward, but you're doing it to get the team behind you and rowing the boat in the same direction. So I think those were really good things that I took away from Premier. I had great bosses while I was there too. Obviously, Chris Gormley, David Hargraves, and then Bruce Radcliffe, all varying kinds of experience, startup through to big companies and providers. So that was super helpful too for me, was just to be associated with good people with good ideas. And I think, to be honest with you, if you would have said, hey, are you going to be at Premier 5 years post acquisition, I would have been like, not a chance in hell. No way. And it ended up being a great time and getting a chance to build a really big team and operate in a different way. And so it definitely, both those flavors have come together to, I think, how I'm running Green Security today, but they definitely equally play into it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I said this before we started recording in jest, but for the listeners, Mickey is one of the few people that have ever had me considering joining a GPO for my work experience. And it's largely because he stayed there for so long. And I know just the way he thinks about business and leading teams and so on. So I'm super excited. So interesting to hear the leading some of the more matrix processes from a GPO into Green Security now, especially when it's never been easier just to do things. Like I say this every day at Handle that with all the resources that are out there, you can literally just do anything. You can roll anything out in a short amount of time. So having that framework and security tied to thinking about process procedure, not making those high risk mistakes, but still being able to move fast, I think is something that not a lot of startup leaders have that perspective on right now. And it might get people in trouble pretty soon with AI dev tools, right? Just rolling something out and your API being exposed and so on.
Totally.
We've talked a little bit about Green Security and mentioned, but for everyone, can you give a breakdown? Obviously, big recent fundraise, and I think that was the genesis of you coming over from Premier, right? So a little background on Green Security, where you guys are at right now, and what you think of the space.
Yeah, Green Security was actually founded back in 2014 by Sean Fitzgibbons. He did an awesome job of kind of building a company up from scratch, being a rep himself. He'd known the space really well. And in April of last year, he sold the company to private equity, and I came on in July. Vendor credentialing has been around for a while. We like to think that we're reimagining the space a little differently. We think of it as all-in access compliance for non-employees in healthcare systems. So if you're not watching visitors, contractors, and vendors, then you have gaps in your compliance policy in terms of access. For us, it's not much different. A sales rep going into the operating room as a specialty rep a handful of times a year, elevator maintenance guy a handful of times a year, HVAC woman a handful of times a year. Like all those people should be credentialed and have the appropriate security checks if they're going to be in your building every day. And I think every day we talk to hospital employees, they're like, there's so many people walking around the halls and I have no idea what they do, why they're here. And with everything you're hearing with kind of safety problems, whether it's people showing up with guns or taking hostages or just violence in general in health systems, we think that this kind of thought process of needing to manage all those groups is extremely important. And what we do is we enforce whatever the requirements of the healthcare system are in terms of each of those different levels of people trying to enter. If you think of the most sensitive being a rep in the OR, flu vaccine, background check, bloodborne pathogen training, OR protocol training, like all those kinds of things, all the way to a visitor where we're just doing some really cursory instant checks to make sure that you're not admitting somebody who's committed a major crime very recently kind of thing. So it's a very interesting, active space right now. And I think we're one of the few companies who it's literally our focus, vendor credentialing, contractor credentialing, this all in compliance. So we wake up every day thinking about how to make it better, easier for the hospital, easier for the reps and contractors, while everyone else, it's just a little bit of what they do. It's everything we do.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing to point out. As soon as you joined Green Security, I did a deep dive on the space, and I found there were some larger roll-up style companies that had it as a product offering. But I think some of the things you lose in that, not to disparage any other company, of course, is to your point, like your sole focus and thinking about operationalizing vendor credentialing is a larger initiative inside healthcare systems. Do you think, since you have so much insight into access in the hospital, I think about a story I heard from Zimmer from Vizient, where she mentioned when she was at Cleveland Clinic one time, there were, I think it was like 4 or 5 vendors from the same organization meeting with different people, or aggregate meetings that she had to be a part of throughout the day. Do you ever think about vendor credentialing being more of like an operational tool for hospital systems to say, hey, you have 4 vendors or 4 people from the same vendor coming in. Here's how you can streamline some of these processes or be a little bit more efficient?
100%. I think our goal is to make it automated. We don't want people to have to check in at a kiosk. We want it to just be a part of the normal workflow of a rep in the hospital or a contractor in the hospital. So think about integrations into surgery scheduling and loaner tray management applications, integrations into badge access systems so that they're just walking in and scanning into the areas they need to go. And if it doesn't open, it's because they're not credentialed and they need to fix that. And on the same token, then giving that data back to the hospital. Is somebody there lingering after their cases are over? Are they there without appointments? The hospitals can set the policies and procedures in terms of what they want to allow, but at least giving them that data is super important. I think one of the things we're really focused on is that I feel like the vendor side of the equation has been ignored for a long time, especially because other groups aren't focusing on it. We want the reps to be in the room. As a former rep, I know the role they play in there, and we know surgeons want them in there. So it's just about making it a safe environment for everyone, including them, in terms of the other reps and contractors that are in the building. So we want to make it as seamless and easy as possible for both sides, where it's just like, I can walk through my hospital feeling confident that all the employees are safe and all the non-employees who are outsourced here working in some capacity are also safe.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the outsourced employee portion, because I'm seeing a trend of increased third-party biomeds inside hospitals. So I think the market used to be like 80-20, and now it's closer to a 60-40 split, maybe even with some companies like TriMedics and GE's outsourced services and PartSource doing their aggregate. So it is really interesting to think about those large conglomerate outsource organizations and the volume of people they might have inside these facilities.
100%. And I think you've been around it long enough. We've seen margin compression. And so more and more stuff gets outsourced. One of the things that makes us unique is we won't take a letter of attestation in terms of a background check from a company, because they only run it once and then that's it. We screen out a lot of people in between 2 background checks. So, whether it's a food service employee who's outsourced or biomed, like you talked about, more and more you're seeing that pop up. And you want to be comfortable that they're following your requirements as a hospital if they're basically acting as an employee, not necessarily those of another company that you're working with. And this is a way to do that. And so that's one thing that makes us unique that really doesn't happen with anybody else in the market.
Yeah, love that. I think it's also important how you mentioned focusing on the vendor, right? We have the marketplace side of the handle business too. And in a lot of cases, if either a credentialing company comes in or another mandatory application you have to use, it's just a cost of doing business with a hospital, but which I mean is the case for a lot of things. But it seems like your guys focus on bringing value to the vendor, make some of those solutions that might feel like friction filled, creates actually opportunity for them, which is a little different than I think a lot of organizations are thinking.
Totally. We just introduced 24/7 support. We're not going to get tons and tons of calls overnight, but if you're a rep in a trauma case and you can't get in at 1 a.m, you've got somebody to call and you can get in. So that's one example. We're trying to keep our price as low as possible too, to be reasonable for the vendors and contractors. And we've added things like expediting credentials where they can just pay a little bit extra if they're in a hurry versus way ahead of time kind of thing, but still keeping the cost low for the overall population, right? So it's like things to opt into that can make life easier for you, but you don't necessarily have to pay extra just to get it. It's funny. We get all kinds of nasty emails, as you can imagine, when things don't go right, or just in general, in terms of having to deal with vendor credentialing at all. And so I respond to a lot of them directly. I'm like, I know, I've been there and we're trying to make it better. What ideas do you have? Listen. And I've had a lot of really good conversations with reps now who are like, at least thank you for listening. And we've gotten some good ideas that we're trying to implement that I think will continue to bring more value for their side of the equation. And ultimately, that's good for the hospital. That's good for the patient. It's good for everybody.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, again, back to the part of the value of your guys being your sole focus, but it's interesting to think about that tied to just B2C or B2B marketing in 2025 is all about influencer marketing is a hot thing. I think you responding to reps and building that level of engagement, eventually those reps are going to talk to the VP of supply chain or CIO or someone about the credentialing platform or so on. So you're building an army of influencers just by sharing goodwill and getting people on board with your application and kind of the way you do business. That's an interesting way to think about it too.
For sure. No, that's our goal when I came on was like, we want to be the most loved access compliance company by both sides of the equation. And we're trying. So that nothing happens overnight, but I've been happy and tell the team, let's just get better every single day. And as long as we get better every single day, we're going to get there. And I think we're starting to see kind of the fruits of that now after about 8 months.
Yeah, that's awesome. So speaking of being loved, part of the way you track being loved is more industry adoption of green security. How has just being on the inside of RFP processes and being close to understanding how hospitals are sourcing vendors or thinking about that, how has that kind of shaped the way you think about bringing an application like this to market or approaching leadership at a hospital system to do what's the major transition, right? To get all your vendors to switch over to a different platform or even implement a platform.
Yeah, no, luckily being at Premier for as long as I was and running the purchase service side of the business, definitely got to see it from the other side. And now I have a good handle on, I think, what hospitals want to see. We obviously try and avoid RFPs if we possibly can. Nobody likes going through that. And I think the other thing is we've got great channel partners. We happen to have a really good relationship with 2 of the 3 major GPOs. We've got good relationships with some of the consulting companies out there. The beautiful thing is that we can quickly bring them savings with our model versus what they're doing today. It creates a revenue stream for them, more or less. That's super helpful to those channel partners. And so that's really been the biggest success story in terms of our go-to-market. I do think, though, that we're trying to spend more time on marketing and education, that you do need to do more than just your vendors. You need this kind of all-in compliance. So we're really going out to the marketplace and really trying to educate them on, if you do all 3 of these paths and control them, then your hospital is going to be a lot more secure, because a vendor who's not registered can't get through the visitor management, a contractor is not getting through the loading dock, all those different kinds of things. It ends up securing the entire facility. And being out and telling that story, it's really starting to resonate. I think people realize that it's something that they need for their facilities.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think tracking on that education piece for sales enablement, I think there's, and correct me if you think I'm wrong in this, I think there's a big shift in how hospital leadership does business now from working with vendors and so on. And while vendor credentialing isn't a new category per se, you have to do education to the market in a way that it is a brand new challenge that they've never considered before, because people are used to their friend Bill or Nancy that they've always bought something from at whatever manufacturer for 20 years. Bill or Nancy are phasing out, and that organization now has 18 different departments instead of just one enterprise rep. So you have to do a whole level of education that's similar to category creation rather than just name recognition in a space.
Yeah, totally. I think we're thinking about it as maybe not completely new category creation, but certainly something adjacent to that. And we're looking for ways to build along that continuum to continue to provide value in terms of the contractor vendor ecosystem, whether it's how they get paid, how they initially get onboarded into their company. Like, that whole spectrum, like we're looking at things along that entire journey. And so that's why I do think it's, like I said, maybe not entirely a new category, but definitely we're not evolving it. We think we're revolutionizing it, and we're still early. But like I said, as long as we're taking it one step better every day, then we're making progress.
Yeah, I love that. I expect nothing less. When I learned about MedPricer a few years ago, I didn't know much about the purchase services space, and it seemed like it just blew up in terms of things that everyone's focused on. I expect you as a right picker from a category perspective, the credentialing space to take into the blow up as well. From, I guess, just staying educated about the market and what's new. I see you post a ton of leadership information on LinkedIn all the time, right? Sometimes it's specific to healthcare. Sometimes it's more just about being great at leading teams. You've even had some like rock stars from previous companies join you at Green Security and come over and so on. Shout out Anna. But thinking about all that, how do you spend time with a family, a recent move, running a company, right? To invest time in sharing, not only learning about new leadership or impactful kind of methodologies, but finding time to share it with others.
That's a great question. I would say that piece of it is really important to me. Culture building, team building. To the extent you build a really good team, then you buy yourself a lot more time to do other important things. You put the right people in the right seat and let them run with it, and then it gives you space to go solve the next problem. So I think I grew up in sports, and I think one of the things is like the best athletes in the world that you look at, they continuously train and get better every single day. They practice every single day. And we do that by going to a sales meeting or doing another implementation or whatever. But the other way you do it is by researching, reading, and staying current. So I definitely carve off time to make sure that I'm able to continue to, at least in bite-sized chunks, ingest some of that information. I've got a handful of mentors who I think have done a great job of getting me to where I am, and definitely impart a lot of knowledge that I try and give back to my team. I think it's just about being intentional and making time for it, because if not, I'm not going to get better. And if I'm not going to get better, then I don't know what I'm doing here, because this is hopefully one of many. I mean, I'm still early on in my career. And so it's definitely a focus of mine to just make sure I keep finding that information. And then I love sharing it too, because I've got Anna as a great example, right? Anna was an individual contributor when she joined MedPricer, ended up leading a team of probably 40, 50 people at Premier. And then she was ready and excited to take on another challenge and come here and lead our customer success and operations. And she's done an awesome job. She went through that same journey of IC up to leading a big group in a big company, and now back down into a small, nimble company with a smaller team, but certainly a lot of responsibility with 150 plus customers to keep happy. But I don't think I would have had the knowledge to give her if I wouldn't have read some of this stuff or gone to conferences or kept up on it. And I think then it also just rubs off, and other people want to learn more and do better and do the same thing with their individual teams. And I think from like a recruiting perspective, it all rolls downhill too. It's like if you recruit the right leadership team members who have the same philosophy in terms of leadership, then it steps down from there. Their direct reports that they end up hiring are doing the same thing. Yeah, we invest a lot of time in getting the team together and making sure we're all on the same page from that perspective.
Love that. Yeah, I saw you guys were leveling up recently at an arcade.
Yes. Oh, we make sure to carve off some time for fun as well.
Love that. Yeah, I share that same philosophy. I've actually had a lot of conversations recently with people, even like mid-career people that are still looking for mentors that they align with. I, similar to you, have had way early in my career, I just had great mentors that kind of nurtured me and that connected me to more mentors and so on. And I think having that exposure early in your career breeds that mindset where you want to share and you want to be that mentor that you had early for different folks. And I get a lot of questions from people because I'm like every morning I'm texting different people that I worked with historically and asking them for feedback and stuff, what I'm working on. And I have a few friends now that are asking, how did you find your mentors? And for me, I wasn't looking for mentors. It was just the right people that I met at the right place that happened to invest in me. Thankfully, luckily, or I wouldn't be here. How do you think about it? Do you think about it in a similar way? It's just the right people and
Same. Yeah, 100% the same. I definitely didn't go out looking for those people. I fell into it, or I got hired by them and then earned more and more trust by going above and beyond in the role. And I would say, the people that I probably have the privilege to mentor now are similar, that they weren't out looking for me. They just went to bat for me, went above and beyond for me, and I want to return the favor. But I do agree that it's like when it happens that way organically, it's even more powerful because it's been like a two-way street and you've done something to further their career or their company or whatever the case might be. Then they're even more exciting and willing to keep investing in your career moving forward.
100%. My first mentor at my first tech company, Channel IQ, his name Jack Bossia. He was actually in my wedding party. That's like how close of like just 1099, $10 an hour data entry David, getting a relationship with this guy, building me for years, ended up being like one of the most important people in my life.
Yep.
So I love that you share that philosophy. So to the young Mickeys that are figuring out, do they be a finance major? Do they be a sales rep? Or what do they do that might not have a mentor yet? What are some key things that you think you invested in to make those people that happen to be the right mentors like align with you? You mentioned going above and beyond. What does that mean to the young Mickeys or Mickets of the world?
Yeah, for me, I think it's one of those things where it's about listening and then executing. And that's what I tell people, even at our company, is if you're the person who overhears your boss or your boss's boss or somebody above you in the organization say, gosh, I wish we had this thing or that thing or whatever it is. And then you're the person who not only does it, but does it 10 times better than that. That's the kind of thing that gets the person to go, all right, this is my guy, this is my gal, this is my horse. Not only am I going to help them now, but let's get them promoted, let's get the people under them, and I want to take a special interest. So I think if you want to get people's attention, it's not just about doing what they tell you well, but like reading between the lines and hearing what they want and what they're not getting from somewhere else, and then just like taking it on and doing it better than anybody could imagine. And some of that I think goes with the research angle we were talking about before. You may not know how to do something, but go to YouTube and figure it out. Read any number of business publications and figure it out. And then the fact that you took a swing and then you're going to come up with something, you're going to get people's respect and you're going to get people to notice you. That's always been my philosophy when people ask that question, is just listen and then do really well. And fast doesn't hurt either, but at least doing it well is super important.
Yeah, super aligned with that. I've always been a bit of a doer or overdoer, right? If there's a challenge. So I love that we share that same mindset. In the world of research, when we were coming up in our early days of tech, it wasn't so easy to figure out how to solve a problem. Like I remember the first time I had to figure out how to do a VLOOKUP, I was reading Excel forms and trying to paste in formulas and all that good stuff. So it wasn't very easy to learn, but we figured it out. Now, with things like GPT and Perplexity and all these other amazing platforms, how are you operationalizing things like that inside your team and encouraging people to use it, but use it respectfully, but also think critically? Like it shouldn't solve every problem for you. How do you, from a Mickey perspective and then from a team perspective, think about that?
Yeah, I think like you, a tool guy. So like I'm always out looking for what the best platforms are for everything, and pretty much always willing to try something that's going to help us to do something better, do something faster, more efficient, all those kinds of things. As long as everything's good from a data security perspective, I just encourage my team. I'm like, if you see something, like let's check it out and let's try it. And if it makes sense, then let's do it. I think from what you're saying, yeah, I don't think it replaces things for now, but it certainly shaves a lot of time off a lot of the things you're doing. Writing for sure. There used to be people who are good writers and people who are not so good writers. Now you can plug in 5 bullet points and end up with something you can edit and sound like a really good writer. Might as well take advantage because everyone else is going to from a speed perspective. So I think staying on top of what the latest and greatest is also ultimately super important. Knowing like what you can squeeze out of it based on the current advances, I think really gives you a leg up, because I think there's a large population that's just following behind and is not using it to the max in terms of whether it's LLM like GPT or whatever it is. I think it's like one of those things where it's like back to like where you invest your time. That's another huge area of investment. You can invest 25 minutes a day reading and you'll figure out some new way of using some open source or free AI things out there to make your day faster, better, more efficient.
Yeah, I don't use social media other than LinkedIn at all, but one of the few Instagram accounts I follow, it's just this account that posts different AI tools every single day. So I literally just save the ones that seem even remotely intriguing, and I'll sign up for a free trial of 5 tools over a weekend and just try to, they all have a specific use case, right? That's the new point solution. There were a million point solutions in hospitals years ago. That's now there's point solutions for everything in AI. So I spend a ton of time doing that on weekends. Just pick a couple and then we'll circle the one we want to keep.
Well, and I also like, even though I'm out of this world a little bit now, I still read all the venture newsletters in terms of the deals that are getting done, who's getting funded. And that's an amazing wealth of pretty much every single one has some AI involvement. And so I'm going to check out what's going on there. And a lot of times you find hidden gems in there too.
Oh, 100%. I think one of the important things to implementing AI though is like educating your team, not just to use it, but use it maximally. Like one of the things that I poke a little fun at right now, and I only say this because I know I've seen none of this from your team or my team because we proofread everything, but in GPT, the little blue diamonds that they use as bullets as a standard, I see so many people that are clearly putting job descriptions, and GPT auto does those stupid blue diamonds, and you can tell people that are just copy and pasting without doing the proofread layer you're talking about. That's like the new layer of separation of being like good at AI or like sloppy with AI. Yeah, I started to like message.
Well put.
Okay,
That's very well put. Yeah, totally agree.
like, hey, I noticed this. It might help if you tried this, but pretty an interesting take on it. But yeah, I think this has been super awesome. Thank you so much for chatting with me and the Canopy readership. Any final thoughts you'd have for either upcoming leaders or people interested in the vendor credentialing space? Or I think we met because I think I randomly messaged you about MedPricer and the Premier arrangement was like, hey, I just want to connect and learn from you about what you're doing and so on. So any final advice to the either younger us or exactly us in the world?
Yeah, first is I got lucky that I grew up in health, lucky or unlucky, however you want to look at it, that I grew up in healthcare. I was the kid of 2 hospital administrators. So I basically grew up in a hospital. But no matter what you do in healthcare, software for vendor credentialing, analytics, people are always going to get sick. It's a rewarding field. And so I always encourage people just to, you don't have to want to work in nursing or medicine or whatever it might be to have ultimately a good impact on the healthcare system here. So I just always encourage people, I'm like, just look at the ecosystem and see if there's things that catch your attention, because it's a great place to work in. And it literally makes you excited to come to work every day because you are solving problems that pretty much every single one of us will have at some point in our lives. And then I think just in terms of for people coming up, be proactive. There's nothing better than someone who proactively connects to learn about an industry. And you'll be surprised about how receptive people are when you're proactive with your communication or with getting tasks done or whatever it is. So that would be my biggest piece of advice is get out front and be excited to learn and go above and beyond.
Awesome. Love that. On a personal note, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate you taking time, and hopefully this creates some value and so on.
Sure. It's one of the most fun ones that I've done. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Thanks for listening to The Operating Room by Canopy, the fastest growing community in healthcare. Huge thank you to Mickey Meehan, CEO of Green Security, for diving into how modern vendor credentialing is reshaping safety and compliance in healthcare. Green Security isn't just ticking boxes. They're building smarter and safer access for hospitals by automating vendor, contractor, and visitor management, offering RFID badge tech for real-time access control, running annual background checks to stay compliant, powering mobile check-ins and audit with ease, and critically, positioning themselves as value adds for vendors because they know firsthand what it's like to be a rep on the front lines. This isn't just about compliance, it's creating a safer environment for staff, patients, and partners. Learn more at gogreensecurity.com.